Welcome back. This is the first of 2 or 3 videos that I'll post on social psychology, our last chapter. I'm going to talk about 2 main topics in this video: conformity and obedience. I should actually have the toilet paper back in here because I think a great example of conformity is going along with the group norm. Right? So what are we doing right now? We're stockpiling food, toilet paper, especially paper goods. Conformity is, a change in opinion or behavior to match behavior of members of the group. And I think what we're doing these days in light of the COVID-19 crisis is a great example of conformity. Maybe some of us need to conform more in terms of group expectations. Some of us need to remember to maintain social distance, to limit our contact, to wash hands. As we'll learn, conformity, there are many strong pressures to conform, but some people do not conform. Conforming is going along with the group norm. We're also going to talk about obedience and probably the most famous experiment by Stanley Milgram on obedience. So I know the first page in the PowerPoints lists a few different examples of group behavior, and I'll get you, I think the definitions for those are very straightforward. I'll just get you to review those in the textbook. So we'll start off with conformity, and what I'd like you to do is put a pause on this video, go into the PowerPoint, and click, and there's a very brief film, about 2 or 3 minutes, and it's an excellent illustration of what Solomon Asch did in his early pioneering studies into conformity. Okay, so pause me. Are you back? Good. Cool video, right? It was a little funny at times. So you get the scenario, a very basic task. You're presented with lines of different lengths, and there's only one real subject in that experiment. The rest of the participants around the table are what are called confederates, and they've all been told ahead of time how to respond. So what they're measuring is how many and how frequently how many subjects do go along with the group norm, even in a situation where the correct answer is just so darn obvious. There's no ambiguity there, is there? Okay, so even when the correct answer is just incredibly obvious, about 75%, 3/4 of the real subjects in the experiment actually went along with the group consensus at least once. Most people conformed on about 1/3 of the trials. So a pretty high incidence of conformity, and this early research has been replicated many times. It's been replicated with women, not just guys. It's been replicated with around the world in different cultural contexts. People conform. Interestingly, about 25% of people never conformed, the nonconformists. And so you might think, well, that's me. If I were put into that scenario, I wouldn't conform, and I don't conform in my day-to-day habits. That could be true. I guess the punchline is about 75% of us do. And consider the situations in which you would be conforming in real life. They're probably a lot more ambiguous than the line matching scenario that Asch put forward, right? There's situations where you're downtown at a club, you're about to head home, and your friend goes, "I'm okay to drive, I've only had a few drinks." Right? And there's going to be 3 or 4 of you in the car, and everybody else says, yeah, come on, you're fine. We can get home. SkyTrain stopped running. Do you go along with the group in that situation? Your friends want to go see a particular movie that you think is horrid. do you go along and conform? So you can think of your own examples. So that's conformity, going along with other people. Why do we conform? Well, we don't want to look stupid. So if everybody else is doing it, maybe we should too. Generally, when you conform, when you agree with people, when you go along with people, you're more well liked. You're in the Big Five language, you're an agreeable personality. You're not pushing back against what the group wants. You're more likely to be liked. And we want to be right. We want to be correct. Holy crap, everybody else is seeing the line this way. I must be wrong. Maybe there's something wrong with my eyesight today. Sorry, need some miso soup. All right. Obedience. Obedience is where you obey authority. Pretty simple. A demand for a change in behavior from an authority figure. Think boss, think military, think parents, think instructor. Somebody tells you to do something and they have positional power, they're an authority figure. So the early research into this was done by Stanley Milgram, and it's fascinating stuff. And in a moment, I'm going to hit pause and get you to click on the link in my PowerPoint and actually see an excerpt from the research. But before we go there, I want to provide a little bit of context. So this research took place a long time ago. Why did it even take place? Well, this is a long time back, but much of it was inspired for Milgram from the Second World War. I believe some of his family were in concentration camps. And so Milgram, at some stage, reflected on what happened to so many Jews in Germany in the Second World War. I'm talking about here about the concentration camp. That's not the right term, but when Jews were killed, exterminated. So this happened to Milgram's family, and so he asked the question: Is there something, is there something about the German people that would have made this happen, or is there something about the situation, the social context, that might have led to this behavior? And so his study took him into a study of the Nazis and the strict hierarchy of power. As we're reviewing this topic on obedience, I think there are lots more contemporary examples. You can think about paramilitary organizations. You can like the police. You can think about jails and the relationship between guards and prisoners. You can also think about if you've ever worked in an organization where strict adherence to authority and obeying rules was expected. If you worked for an autocratic boss, a boss who said, "Do it this way, Ross," and then you've had some experience of what it's like to be on the receiving end of authority. So anyway, let's push pause at this stage. Go and watch the video. It's very well done. It's some original footage, and then come on back. Okay. See you in a moment. You're back. Good. So pretty compelling stuff. So just to be really clear, okay, nobody was shocked. You know that, right? The shocks were fake. And all of the subjects were the teachers who administered the shocks. So the whole experiment was about, would people actually obey an authority figure, in this case the experimenter, and at what level would they administer shocks? Prior to doing this research, Milgram went out and interviewed a variety of psychologists and psychiatrists, and the consensus was that only maybe 1% of your subjects will go all the way to the end and administer all the shocks. Only the sadists, only the really horrid people will do that. Well, in actual fact, if you click on that hyperlink in the PowerPoint, you'll see 65% of subjects went all the way. So they continued to ask those questions, and every time the subject made a mistake, they would administer a shock, and they went all the way up to, darn it, I don't have that, oh, here it is. Some 2/3, 65%, went all the way up to 450 volts. That's pretty strong. Everybody, all subjects went up to at least 300 volts. So literally, excuse the pun, but this was shocking at the time when Milgram published the research. It was shocking on a couple of levels that so many people would obey authority, and they were engaged in this experiment. They really thought those shocks were happening. When they interviewed people later, they were obviously had been under stress and viewed the situation as credible, as real. So you can imagine there was people were challenging Milgram in terms of his findings and also in terms of the ethics of doing that research, right? You could not get that study through an ethics review board these days because of the potential risks, harm to the subjects. So the folks who challenged his findings said, it happened because it was at Yale University, prestigious university in the United States. So what Milgram and his colleagues did was they replicated the study. And the first replication, one of the first replications they did was, they said, okay, if subjects went all the way because it was Yale University and they figured, well, the researchers here know what they're doing, let's replicate the experiment in another environment. And so they did the experiment in a rundown office building. And roughly 50% obeyed, went all the way to the end. Next, and this is a creepy one, they varied how close the proximity of the teacher, the subject, and the learner. So in one replication, they actually had the teacher place the shock plate on top of the learner's hand. Okay? So you can imagine this required some pretty good acting on the part of the learner. But even under that, in that scenario, about 30% went all the way to the end, even after the person was unconscious. The presence of others who disobey, as you might expect if the subject witnesses other people who push back and say, no, I don't care what you say, experimenter. I don't think the experiment does have to go on. I don't have to proceed. Those folks who witness somebody like that were obviously less likely. They only got about 10% obedience if two other teachers disobeyed. So I've got another link in here to you at the bottom of that PowerPoint that says that was 1961, early 60s, we're more aware of the dangers of blindly following authority now, right? And there's a link to a YouTube clip, and to be honest, I can't remember what's in there. I remember. It's a recent replication of the Milgram paradigm by a guy called Berger. Okay, remember his name, Berger. And he did this experiment in a way that was acceptable to the ethics review committee, and he replicated the findings. He found very similar findings, and this was pretty recent. I'm going to say about 15 years ago, maybe less. Right. I also reference Phil Zimbardo's prison study here. So Phil Zimbardo is a famous social psychologist. I'm going to get you to watch the video, but and I'll send you off to do that in just a second. But I guess just to set a bit of context, really this was a role-playing exercise where Zimbardo decided that he was going to study what would happen in a simulation, in a simulated prison, which was Stanford University. And he randomly assigned students who signed up to participate in an experiment into either the guard group or the prisoner group. And then he simply watched to see what would happen. The study was supposed to run for 2 weeks. I think he canceled it after 6 days. Guards were abusive. Prisoners were suffering really strong stress reactions. It's a very compelling study, again, on the power of our social environment. And I want you to percolate a little bit on whether you can see applications in other situations. Think about our prison system. Think about, and this is going back a few years, but I don't know if you guys remember Abu Ghraib. It was a military prison in Iraq. And a few years ago, some pretty horrible pictures emerged of Americans abusing, psychologically abusing some of the prisoners in that military prison, and it's a nice parallel to Zimbardo's research. Unfortunately, a real scenario. Okay, I'm gonna sign off with you at this stage, and stay posted. I'll post likely a couple more videos. I may just post a final video, which is a review session that I usually run. Actually, I'll post the questions that I present in that review session and maybe just do a quick run through of what the answers are. Okay, bye-bye.